On this Tuesday night, another coordinated attempt to manipulate U.S. voters and using Facebook to do it. Fake accounts meant to sow division, polarize the population just months before the midterms. But who's behind it?
Also tonight, the legal battle over homemade guns. They are untraceable, undetectable. The blueprints just clicks away. But just how big a threat do 3D printed guns really pose?
And why soccer's signature move is more risky for girls. This is The National. During the U.S. presidential election, Facebook was filled with politically divisive content and fake news rooted in Russia, designed to turn Americans against each other. Facebook did little to stop it then, but today a different story. The social media giant decisively shutting down dozens of suspected trolls. Susan Ormiston explains the significance.
This is a call to protest in Washington, supposed to happen next week. The problem is, the account behind this is fake. And its hosts, resistors, are not who they claim to be. So Facebook shut it down today. In all, 32 pages and other accounts suspended, saying these are bad actors trying to sow division amongst voters before the U.S. midterm elections in November. So who is behind them? Well, Facebook suspects Russians, but it can't be definite.
It's clear that whoever set up these accounts went to much greater lengths to obscure their true identities than the Russian-based Internet Research Agency, IRA, did in the run-up to the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
There are distinct hallmarks of 2016, just not enough conclusive technical evidence, says Facebook's head of cybersecurity, Nathaniel Gleischer.
We can say that these accounts engaged in some similar activity and have connected with known IRA accounts.
Facebook has been under vice-like pressure to police its platform, to call out the fake sites and groups trying to draw in unsuspecting users. High time it revealed what it's found, according to the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security.
We are in a crisis mode. The Cat 5 hurricane has been forecast, and now we must prepare.
Last spring, when we visited Facebook headquarters, Monica Bickert told us they are laser-focused on detecting fake accounts.
We know that there were accounts before the 2016 election that shouldn't have been there. And now our tools are good enough that there are more than 1 million accounts per day that we stop at the time of creation because we know that they are fake.
1 million a day?
Yes.
That's a pretty big number. It's an arms race, says the company, and these are the weapons. Critically injured last time, it moved proactively this time.
The significance here is that these are coordinated campaign, and they are not only just posts that are going up on Facebook, they're advertisements going up on it. They were setting up protests that were fake, right, but getting real people to go to them in the real world.
In Washington, Congress is threatening tonight it will bring in a new sanctions bill against Russia. And that advertised protest? Well, Facebook informed everyone who said they might come, about 3,200 people, it's not on.
So, Susan, seems like the same MO, but what's the biggest difference this time around?
Yeah, as you heard, the company said there are similarities, there are differences. One of them is IP addresses. Last time there were some Russian IP addresses. This time there are none, although they caution those can be spoofed. The other thing is advertising. Some of the advertising last time, according to the Mueller investigation, was paid for by Russians. This time, it's paid in American and Canadian dollars, and it's small. It's $11,000 paid on advertising.
Lots of mysteries here, including the use of Canadian dollars. The scale here, a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, last time what we know from that investigation is 29 million Americans directly viewed those fake sites. You put in sharing, and it's more like 126 million Americans saw them. This time, we're talking about only 290,000 people had access to these accounts. So, big difference. So the question left to chew on is this a smaller, more carefully disguised campaign by Russian actors, or is it some other disruptor going by the same playbook?
Okay, Susan, thank you. Well, as Susan said, we don't know for sure who's behind all of this, but you can see why red flags have already gone up. Back in February, Special Counsel Robert Mueller indicted 13 Russian intelligence agents Among the charges, creating fake social media accounts, buying Facebook ads, even paying people to take part in rallies to undermine Hillary Clinton and the Democrats for the benefit of Donald Trump by inflaming existing divides in the United States. What did that look like? Well, take a look at Houston, May 21st, 2016. 2 rallies happening at the exact same time. Angry Americans squaring off. An internet research agency was behind both rallies. It created a group called Heart of Texas, promoted a Stop the Islamization of Texas rally, planned for noon. But it also created a group called United Muslims of America, defending Muslim rights. That rally also planned for noon, right across the street. The confrontation wasn't huge, but it brought attention and perhaps made even wider a sometimes ugly divide in American society. And Andrew Mueller is also investigating whether there was any coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign to interfere in that election.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. And today, the first criminal trial stemming from his wider probe began. The accused, Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Now, he's charged with tax evasion and bank fraud, so collusion isn't part of it, at least not on the surface. Keith Bogue explains.
The dark van allowed Paul Manafort to travel from jail to the Virginia courthouse, protected from the prying eyes of the media and public. So he missed this, but his lawyer didn't. For what might have seemed like the millionth time, Kevin Downing heard the question that has dogged him and his client since the indictment last year.
Any chance that he may decide to flip and cooperate?
No chance. Within just a few hours, a jury of 6 men and 6 women was seated and the trial began. The prosecution said the evidence would show Manafort is a shrewd liar who collected more than $60 million for his work with the government of Ukraine, hid it from the U.S. government and didn't pay tax on it, while spending it extravagantly on houses, cars, and clothes, including a $15,000 jacket made from an ostrich. He created cash out of thin air, said the prosecutor. Manafort's defense will put the blame on his former right-hand man, Rick Gates, who's turned witness for the government. Manafort's lawyer says he'll show that Gates was the real criminal, that he embezzled millions from Manafort and hid the money. Rick Gates had his hand in the cookie jar, and he couldn't take the risk that his boss might find out, said lawyer Thomas Sonlee. But the government's case will rest heavily on documents such as tax returns and receipts. And that's why experienced prosecutors such as Seth Waxman believe the evidence against Manafort is strong.
It's hard math. You brought in $15 or $20 million worth of revenue. You used it to buy cars, houses, or whatever. Where is that on your taxes?
If convicted, Manafort is likely to spend the rest of his life in prison, unless Trump pardons him. But he's gambling he can win this trial and also a separate trial on similar charges in September.
If he loses either one of those, he can still walk into Mueller and say, look, I want to cooperate now. Prosecutors might not like it, but they'll take him.
The prosecutors might deal with Manafort even after he's convicted, Andrew, because Manafort could be the key witness to any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians. Manafort was one of 3 Trump people at that infamous Trump Tower meeting where they expected to get stolen information about Hillary Clinton, what they called dirt from the Russians. The 2 others in the meeting were Trump's son and his son-in-law, so of those 3, Manafort is considered the most likely to flip.
And Keith, President Trump has said repeatedly that he didn't collude with Russia, but today he seemed to change tactics.
That's right. This morning, Trump picked up on what his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said yesterday, tweeting that collusion is not a crime. But remember that it's the opinion of Giuliani and many others that a president can't be indicted for crimes anyway. So they aren't expecting Trump to have to defend himself in a court of law. What they might be preparing for is impeachment, where they could argue to Congress that collusion is not a crime. Impeachment is a political process, ultimately, fought in the court of public opinion, where people, including congressmen, can believe a crime is or isn't whatever they want to believe it is or isn't. Andrew?
Keith Bogue in Washington. Thanks very much.
Turning now to another legal battle involving the Trump administration, the race to stop what some fear is the next gun threat, homemade weapons made with a 3D printer that can be lethal and untraceable. Late today, a U.S. federal judge blocked the release of blueprints allowing people to make their own firearms just hours before they were set to be published online. The sudden availability of instructions would have meant anyone with a 3D printer capable of the job could make handguns, even semi-automatic assault rifles like this one. Even President Trump, a staunch defender of gun rights, seemed to question whether that idea makes any sense. Now, with tonight's federal court decision, that may leave the blueprints in limbo, but they'd already been downloaded thousands of times. Stephen D'Souza now with how a plastic weapon has reshaped the gun control debate.
With 200 3D printers, Voodoo Manufacturing in Brooklyn can mass-produce everything from plastic machine parts to corporate swag. But there's one thing they won't do.
We will not print any weapons or firearms.
Co-founder Jonathan Schwartz broke that policy for CBC today to show us just how easy it is to print a 3D gun.
After probably a couple hours of printing and getting these parts to fit together, you could have a working firearm.
It's untraceable, and aside from an optional metal insert, it's made from the same material as Lego.
If you were to walk through a metal detector with this right now, you would not be detected.
In 2013, self-proclaimed crypto-anarchist Cody Wilson invented this 3D printed gun, meant to make firearms more accessible. The 5-year legal battle over the release of its blueprints ended this June when the Trump administration settled the case. That would have allowed Wilson's company to start publishing again, plans for everything from a pistol to an AR-15.
Washington has failed us.
New Jersey was one of the states that won today's injunction.
These are guns that can be downloaded for destruction by anyone. Fugitives, felons, terrorists, domestic violence offenders, juveniles, the mentally unstable.
The problem, though, even with the federal injunction announced today, the plans are already out there, as they have been for a while, available on plenty of other sites.
Just like what we saw with the music industry in the early 2000s, it's very hard to regulate the distribution of digital files on the internet.
Kastner admits they can't close Pandora's box, but they have to try.
This is as much a fight about the future as it is the present. And with the speed and rapid nature of technological advancements, we're very, very concerned about the precedent here.
He says federal lawmakers have to find other ways to regulate 3D printed guns, because as technology improves, the danger will only increase. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
And tonight, that 3D gun company has agreed it won't post any new blueprints online until September, while that multi-state lawsuit makes its way through the courts. But as Stephen pointed out, anyone who knew where to look on the internet could have made their own weapons for some 5 years. And the U.S. government admitted as much today.
At least since the year 2013, these CAD files, these computer-assisted design files, have been available online. They've been legal for U.S. citizens to actually download.
The plans may be available, but it costs several $1,000s to buy a 3D printer capable of manufacturing these so-called ghost guns. And you need to have some skill to make them. So many gun advocates argue that if criminals really want a gun, there are easier ways than building one out of plastic.
The reality is it's much easier to go and buy a gun on the streets.
And the durability of 3D printed firearms is questionable. Take a look at this. U.S. law enforcement officials tested plastic guns, and they fell apart after a single round was fired.
The truth is that many times they fail and they break. They're not very durable, and they really don't work.
So experts say it isn't likely there'll be a rush of people trying to make their own guns. Of course, if the plans are online, people around the world could download them, including in Canada. Worth pointing out that here it's illegal to make or possess a firearm without a license, and Ottawa is keeping a close eye on the case in the United States.
What if you could quite literally photocopy a weapon? And it would be usable to cause harm to other people. That is a critical issue that law enforcement and governments are examining around the world.
Canadians who make their own 3D plastic guns face mandatory prison time if they are convicted.
Well, it's being called the aid sector's Me Too moment. British lawmakers have released findings of an investigation into reports of sexual exploitation of disaster victims by some of the very aid workers who were supposed to be helping them. Investigators say the system is rife with abuse, and aid agencies aren't doing enough to stop it. Katie Simpson walks us through it.
In Haiti's earthquake-ravaged streets, torment persisted at the hands of those summoned to help. Aid workers preyed on vulnerable women and girls, and it is now clear that kind of suffering is not uncommon.
What we have found is that this is a widespread problem of sexual exploitation and abuse. We think that it is endemic.
A report by British lawmakers says abuse by aid workers has been a problem for years. Organizations are sluggish to respond to claims of wrongdoing to the point that it appears to be complacency verging on complicity. The study recommends making it easier to report abuse, more funding to support investigations, and developing an aid worker registry to screen out predators.
Sometimes people target our industry to get access to these people. And I think what's very welcome about this report is that recognition that this needs to be treated as a kind of large-scale criminal activity.
The report is being hailed as long overdue, but some advocates argue the only way to actually start changing the problematic culture within the aid sector is to force charities and governments to do more to compensate victims.
We need to make sure that they've got a right to reparation so they can begin to recover from this awful, awful abuse.
But aid groups, at least for now, appear to be focusing on prevention instead. Oxfam is promising to do more after it admitted some staff hired prostitutes while working in Haiti's earthquake zone. Other organizations have pledged reform as well, but little has been seen in the field.
There are conversations still mostly are at headquarters at a very high sort of policy level. It's very, very hard to tell what, if anything, is really changing on the ground.
This former aid worker runs a private Facebook page for her peers where stories about abuse are not unusual. She is hopeful, though, the public conversation around Me Too will finally force these aid groups to make meaningful change and encourage more women to come forward. Katie Simpson, CBC News, London.
And a few other developing stories we're keeping tabs on, including quite a story out of Mexico. A plane crashed. It was destroyed, but incredibly, everyone on board survived. Now, it's not totally clear if the Aeromexico jetliner had taken off and then crashed or if it just ran off the runway, but it ended up on its belly, catching fire in a nearby field. There were more than 100 people on board, but as I said, everyone survived, though 2 people are in critical condition. As for what exactly might have caused that crash, the investigation's still ongoing, but officials say the airliner was hit by a wind gust just as it was leaving the runway.
For something like this to happen, you guys hear this all the time. Like, it never happens in my neighborhood, but honestly, this is, when I came and saw that, I can't believe it.
And in Calgary today, 3 people were found dead in 2 separate homes. Police found the bodies this morning after receiving a call from someone to check in on those homes. Beyond that, they're not saying much about what might have happened, except that they believe the deaths are linked and they have a suspect in custody.
Here's what else we're working on tonight on The National. Vlad Guerrero Jr. one step closer to the major leagues. We take you to Buffalo as the Blue Jays' next big thing makes his AAA debut.
Plus, important info for parents, why heading a soccer ball might be riskier for young girls than boys.
And meet the scientist tasked with a difficult job, tracking an orca which has spent days carrying its dead calf.
We think maybe it's part of the grieving process, just the physical and emotional pain she must be going through to carry it. I catch myself at random times, like tearing up or thinking about different things.
Plane evacuations should be fast, no more than 90 seconds to get everyone off. But in several recent emergencies, many passengers seem to be more preoccupied with saving their bags than themselves. And as Salima Shivji explains, changing that mindset could be difficult.
Chaos and fear in the moments after these passengers looked out to see flames shooting up from the wing.
Mayday, West at 2425, we're evacuating.
The pilot urgently working with air traffic control to get everyone to safety.
Grab your jackets, guys.
None of the passengers was injured, but there was a major issue with the evacuation. Too many people ignored a key warning from flight attendants.
Numerous passengers were taking carry-on bags,
And as a result of that, the evacuation process was impeded and significantly slowed.
The Transportation Safety Board found the same scenario in 2 other serious plane crashes. Vital seconds lost when people stopped for their laptops and carry-on bags in Halifax in 2015, and when this Air France flight skidded off a Toronto runway, seriously injuring 12 people back in 2005. Ever since, the TSB has urged Transport Canada to make the warnings about bags mandatory.
If there is a need to evacuate the aircraft, leave your personal belongings behind.
Air Canada already does it, and WestJet plans to starting this fall. But it's not required. Transport Canada only recommends that airlines warn you to leave your bags behind, even though the department recently issued a safety alert saying those voluntary warnings aren't so effective. Mandatory or voluntary, that's not the only problem. This flight attendant says many passengers simply tune out.
People may get a bit complacent and forget the fact that every plane is a little bit different.
He suggests slipping the warnings about carry-ons in right before a movie.
Take a moment, take 10 seconds to plug some safety information in there and really capture people's attention at a moment when they aren't expecting it.
A creative way to get the message across that stopping for a carry-on is just too dangerous for everyone on board. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Ottawa.
Still ahead on the National, move over Vancouver. Seth Rogen is stepping out. The comedian, now the voice of the Toronto transit system as well.
Plus, a Halifax police officer with some pretty sweet moves gets a huge crowd on and offline. And our own Tom Murphy gets a little dance lesson in our moment of the day.
So the first one is a whip, and then we nay-nay. Nay-nay, okay. And then we do it again, same hand, whip.
Tonight on The National, 2 poignant stories about endangered whales and the desperate efforts to save them. In a moment, we'll take you to the Bay of Fundy, where search is underway for a right whale tangled in rope. But first, we begin on the West Coast, where an orca is trying to keep her dead calf afloat. Researchers say the calf died a week ago and probably lived for only a few hours. It's yet another blow to the dwindling population of southern resident orcas. As Briar Stewart explains, it's not yet clear what happened.
So it would make sense that they would be somewhere out here.
This is how Taylor Shedd has spent most of his waking hours for the past week, navigating through the Salish Sea to keep watch on a mother in mourning. The southern resident killer whale, known as J35, has been pushing and carrying her dead calf with her since July 24th.
She's still has this stress and this pain that she must be going through. It doesn't really hit me until I get back to the office late at night and I'm going through the images.
That she's still going through this 8 days on.
Yeah, I mean, I catch myself at random times, like tearing up.
Shedd says whales have been known to carry their dead offspring, and it's believed to be part of a grieving process that scientists don't fully understand. But to carry it for this long is unprecedented, which is why teams from the U.S. and Canada are working to keep watch on the whale and other boats back.
It's probably a lot more difficult for her to forage while she's doing all this as well, so we are concerned a little bit about her body condition.
The whales are tracked by boaters calling in sightings and by audio recordings like this, picked up when the pod moves past sound equipment underwater. Southern resident whales are already closely monitored because they're endangered. There are only 75 left.
This little calf was a girl, which would have been really important to this community because she would have been able reproductively to contribute additional calves. So it's sad on so many levels.
Once the mother finally lets the calf go, researchers are hoping to retrieve it so they can find out just why she died.
We spend about 10 or 11 hours on the water each day.
Until then, Shedd and the rest of his crew say they will try to track the orca as closely as they can to help a mother who, for some reason, is not ready to let go. Briar Stewart, CBC News, off the coast of Washington State.
Now, off the East Coast, whale rescue teams are in a race against time to find and free a North Atlantic right whale tangled in a rope. The 10-year-old whale was spotted yesterday morning in the Bay of Fundy. 3 rescue teams from Canada and the United States have been dispatched to find it, but fog, wind, waves, and mechanical problems have been slowing them down. North Atlantic right whales are endangered, so losing even one is significant. It's estimated there are fewer than 500 left in the world and only 100 reproducing females. More than a dozen have turned up dead in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. As Tom Murphy found out last year, scientists may be desperate to save them, but there are no clear answers.
It's a mystery. At least 15 North Atlantic right whales dead in just a few short weeks, leaving few clues but carcasses littering the shores of the East Coast. A fragile population that was just coming back from the brink of extinction. Now a mystery that needs unraveling.
We're still trying to help this population recover one whale at a time. And so each of these losses affects its potential for recovery.
This is a very depressing story. And if the mortalities continue at anything what they have in this last year, if they approach it, we've got a situation that we may not be able to turn around.
Here on the waters that hug the shore of Lubec, Maine, whale detectives, if you like, are on the case. At dawn all summer long, on a tiny 20-foot boat, these research scientists steam 3 hours into the Bay of Fundy between Maine and Nova Scotia, patrolling, searching for clues.
So this is a real deep water area in excess of 200 meters in depth in places.
Mo Brown is a right whale scientist at the Canadian Whale Institute. For the past 37 summers, she's come here to work with other experienced right whale researchers. This year, looking for evidence, hoping for a lead in a desperate situation.
That is a critical area. It has been a critical area for the North Atlantic right whale. What's happening there now?
Well, this year has been a year with very few sightings. So we had a couple of dozen right whales the end of July, early August. And then we had a lot of surveys with no right whales sighted.
And that's what has researchers on edge. To lose so many whales in one summer is much more than tragic. It's a catastrophe for one simple reason. Fewer than 500 North Atlantic right whales are left on the planet. They are solitary and in their own way mysterious, and they don't give up their secrets easily.
We're just looking over the surface of the ocean. There is magic by seeing the birds, but there is also tremendous magic by seeing a whale surface up. We know we can collect a little information on that whale and contribute to our understanding of it, and then it disappears again, and we're essentially just looking at the surface of the water. So the magic lies below.
Now there's an international effort to try to understand the North Atlantic right whale and its migration habits. This mother and calf was spotted in the Gulf of St. Lawrence this summer.
Like spiky things breaking the surface of the water, and then again.
Hundreds of groups from regular citizens to respected scientists up and down the coast of North America are part of this Herculean effort to save a species.
Yeah, I see. It's just like a tree branch or something. Yeah.
But get this, researchers are baffled. The whales aren't showing up where they usually do, and no one is really sure why.
And so days like this, where we can potentially spend 12 hours steaming around the Bay of Fundy, that has traditionally been such a lucrative place for right whales, and not see any, the challenge we're then faced is how long do we stay here and keep doing this?
So when the trail goes cold, try to retrace it. Here at the farthest tip of Cape Cod in Provincetown. In the spring, these waters are teeming with North Atlantic right whales, mothers and their calves. A feeding frenzy before heading further north to Canadian waters.
When the doors open to break the surface of the water, it makes them incredibly difficult to see.
An entire industry has been built up on their majestic beauty. Whale watching tours.
Here we go, there's the calf back up at about 10.
In waters where the whales were once hunted for their valuable oil. There is a reverence for whales here. Listen to naturalist Carolyn O'Connor talk about the right whale.
I really fell in love with them with a certain behavior that I saw down in the calving and breeding grounds. It's a behavior called cradling, where the mom will be upside down at the surface and she will hold her calf in between her two pectoral flippers. And it's very much a bonding situation. I'm sure other species do that as well. I've only seen it with the right whales. I'm sure humpbacks do that as well, but that's what made me fall in love with them. And they're not a species that gets enough attention, in my opinion. So I'm kind of, like I said, advocating for them a little bit.
And the right whale desperately needs advocates. The mammal's birthing rates are dropping. Add to that the untimely deaths this summer. These mammals, who can live as long as humans and only reproduce every 3 years, are in trouble. Charles Stormy Mayo, right whale scientist with the University of Massachusetts, is based here in Provincetown, where they have not seen the carnage of right whales found in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
There's too many whales dying in one location. There are times we have 200 whales in Cape Cod Bay. They pass through shipping lanes and very active fishing areas, and we do not have that number of entanglements or ship strikes.
And he fears that the number of deaths could in fact be much higher.
There may very well be a number of carcasses that weren't found. Perhaps whales that drowned in heavy gear, and even more likely, carcasses that blew offshore that were never found. So whatever numbers we get, they're probably a minimum, and the maximum is anybody's guess.
From here, the right whale mystery only deepens. Instead of coming to the Bay of Fundy to feed, they're going farther north to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, in unfamiliar waters where this summer's unprecedented tragedy unfolded. Scientist Amy Knowlton.
Their food resources are shifting. What brought right whales here to the Bay of Fundy was significant plankton levels. What we're seeing now is that these plankton patches don't seem to be happening, certainly not in the time of year that we're still here. Whether it's happening earlier, whether it's not happening at all, we don't know the answer to that.
Back in Lubec, Maine, at Whale Research Headquarters, in a shabby old Victorian house turned lab, Amy pulls up the stark photos from this summer.
The image on the left here is the carcass with a lot of the skin is gone.
Some of them entangled in fishing gear, others showing signs of blunt trauma, most likely being struck by a ship in one of the busiest shipping lanes in North America.
We have an extensive photo ID database.
Amy knows these whales like family members. Each one has identifying features. But she never imagined she would have to use those features to identify so many dead whales.
And we were able to say, okay, go to our software system and say, pull up all the individuals that have a black chin patch and are female, and
you can see the scars.
And you can see the scars here on the bottom right.
This is the same.
This is the same whale alive. So that's her ventral chin, and you can see these scars line up exactly. And we were able to match the majority of the carcasses that were found up there.
It was a difficult summer for these scientists.
I think we have all been tracking these individuals throughout their life. You know, we know how many calves they've had. We know who's fathers. We just know so much about the individuals, so it's personally heartbreaking to me.
Now the next step is trying to find a way to minimize the threat to right whales.
We're testing some ropes in Massachusetts with some lobster fishermen down there. They developed these like Chinese finger type sleeves, working with a rope manufacturer, that are of 1,700 pound strength, and they can splice them into their end line every 40 feet. And the hope is that if a whale hits that particular end line, that it's going to break it instead of start wrapping itself up in the heavy gear that's attached.
Define shipping lanes that steer vessels away from areas where whales gather can also greatly reduce deaths. They know it works. It's been done in the Bay of Fundy.
Time is of the essence because we expect right whales to return to the Gulf of St. Lawrence next summer. So we still have our work cut out for us. These animals are still holding a lot of secrets from us.
Time is against these scientists. They need answers for the simplest question: where are the right whales going next? They can't protect them if they can't find them.
Oh, Steve.
Suddenly, on the horizon.
One there, there's one at 2 o'clock.
Oh, nice.
But ever so quickly, the excitement of spotting the familiar blow fades. It's not a right whale, but a pod of humpbacks, the wrong species. And so the mystery continues, the right whale refusing once again to give up its secrets from the deep. Tom Murphy, CBC News, on the Bay of Fundy.
Tom did that story for us last year, and a few months ago, the Canadian government unveiled a new plan to protect these whales. Among some of the changes, lowering the speed limit for vessels traveling in the western Gulf of St. Lawrence, closing certain fishing areas when whales are in the area, and requiring commercial fishing fleets to report any interactions with whales.
And a reminder for you, the National Today takes you inside our journalism every weekday afternoon. Go deeper on the top stories or read about stories you may have missed. Subscribe to our newsletter, cbcnews.ca/The National. Tonight on The National, 20 people are missing as the car fire in Northern California continues to grow. The missing are all people from in and around the city of Redding, which was devastated last week by the fire. So far, it's killed at least 6 people, burned nearly 900 homes to the ground, and it's still out of control. Meanwhile, in Ontario, wildfires there, too, are forcing more evacuations. The big fire of note is called Parry Sound 33, and it just grew to about 100 square kilometers in size. A number of areas south of Sudbury are part of the new slate of evacuations. And on BC's south coast, distant wildfires are being blamed for hazy skies and poor air quality. Environment Canada is warning people to avoid strenuous outdoor activities, at least until the air is a little easier to breathe. And another issue has been the heat. Last night was so hot, in fact, BC Hydro saw record-breaking electricity use because so many people were turning on their air conditioners and their fans. Well, it's been a tough season for the Toronto Blue Jays. Injuries to aging players piled up, and so did the losses. So some fans are shifting their focus to the team's youth and its minor league affiliate in Buffalo.
More than double this home run total as that one's a hot shot to Guerrero. Down to the turf, picks it up, throws it to first, and it's in time.
So that's Vladimir Guerrero Jr., baseball's top prospect, and tonight, just one step away from the majors. The Jays' 19-year-old phenom got promoted to AAA ball over the weekend, and he wrapped his first game with the Buffalo Bisons earlier this evening. He even scored a few runs, batting one in, which, by the way, shouldn't surprise anyone. Guerrero Jr. has been lighting up the minors, and it runs in the family. His dad was a Hall of Famer, played for the Expos in the 90s. And so lots of people turned up in Buffalo tonight for a glimpse at what the Blue Jays' future may hold. And the CBC's Jamie Strachan was there too.
In sports, there are few guarantees. Prospects come and go, but some players are deemed truly special. Enter Vladimir Guerrero Jr. His rise through the Jays minor league system has been rapid, and for the team's fans, it's a reason to get excited in a season where there has been little to cheer about. Many made the 2-hour drive from Toronto to Buffalo just to catch a glimpse.
The raw power that he has is something that very few guys at this level can match. He's just a really special player.
Guerrero Jr. caught the attention of fans during spring training when he hit a walk-off home run during an exhibition game in Montreal. He's playing third base tonight, and his arrival here in Buffalo comes with intense pressure and scrutiny. But speaking with reporters earlier today through an interpreter, he didn't appear fazed.
I don't get surprised by this. I just need to come and here and do my job, put up my numbers, and do the best I could.
He may be only 19, but he's already well-versed in baseball cliches.
It's the same baseball. It's the same baseball. The only thing that I need to do is just, go out there and play the game.
Guerrero was born in Montreal as his father, Vladimir Guerrero Sr., was emerging as a perennial all-star for the Montreal Expos. Guerrero Sr. was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame over the weekend, and the two share the same power and love for the game.
He's always thinking every opportunity is a good opportunity, and he never gets caught up in what's going on around him. You look over at third, and if he's not smiling, he's smiling on the inside.
Already, there's pressure on the Blue Jays to promote Guerrero to the big club in September to give fans something to cheer about. Another Guerrero to lift the spirits of Canadian baseball fans. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Buffalo.
Hard hits off a bat are one thing, but when they come off the head, well, that's a whole different ballgame. A recent study took a closer look at heading in soccer, and as Cass Russi learned, it can hit female players far worse than men.
Make your neck stiff and then move your head to the ball.
These young soccer players are learning how to head the ball safely.
We tell them to make their neck muscles really tight. So all they have to do is move their head forward to the ball, and it makes it safe for them.
Heading is an integral part of the beautiful game, but also controversial because of concerns over head injuries.
Buddy, what's this? 1,
Joanna Roy started playing when she was 6.
Not only it's my favorite thing to do, it was the thing that I did every single day. It was my life.
But a series of hard hits to the head forced Roy off the pitch for good.
And my head was hurting and I was dizzy and the lights on the subway seemed really loud.
In a new study, researchers in the U.S. found that women fare worse than men when it comes to brain trauma from heading soccer balls.
There seems to be clearly a biological difference between men and women that makes the brain more vulnerable.
Researchers looked at nearly 100 amateur players. Using a special MRI, researchers scanned the players' brains and found that damaged brain tissue was 5 times worse in female players.
The areas in the brain that are colored in blue are areas where the more heading the players did, the more abnormal the brain was.
Researchers aren't sure why women might be more sensitive to head injuries than men. It could be hormones or just differences in neck strength.
The actual structure has changed.
Dr. Paul Eklund has done his own research into sports-related brain injuries with hockey players. When it comes to soccer, he doesn't believe there's any safe way to head a soccer ball and wants the practice banned at the amateur level.
The head and neck should be off limits. And this isn't radical. It's proven with science.
In the U.S., a ban on heading for players under 10 has been in effect since 2015. Canada Soccer says they recommend coaches don't teach heading to young players, but there doesn't appear to be any Canada-wide guidelines with specific rules. Cass Russi, CBC News, Toronto.
And our moment is up next. Meet the Halifax police officer whose dance moves went viral.
Well, I think that it showed police in a different light. Where'd you get the moves? You know what? I have to say my mother. I love you, Mom.
And then just put it together.
All right, before that, actor and comedian Seth Rogen says he wants to make everyone's transit experience as wonderful as possible. So, less than a week after joining forces with Vancouver's transit system, he's coming to Toronto as well.
Hey, TTC customers, Seth Rogen here, fellow Canadian and public transit user.
Toronto transit riders will be hearing a lot more of this. Rogen recorded 12 messages that started playing in subway stations today. They cover everything from blocking doors.
I always hold the door for my mother because she raised me right. But holding a subway door for her would get me in trouble. I don't need the hassle or the delay, so leave them doors alone.
To transit faux pas like personal grooming.
I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, but stop clipping your fingernails on the TTC. It's gross.
The move comes less than a week after Rogen's voice appeared on Vancouver Transit.
I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm very proud to be from Vancouver, and I grew up taking public transit my whole life, and I still use public transit when I'm in the city.
In Vancouver, he's a hometown star. But in Toronto, well, not everyone is happy about the new voice of the TTC.
I was a bit upset about that only because I think he's from Vancouver, and I thought we should get a Torontonian to do it.
Maybe Mike Myers. Maybe Mike Myers, but Seth Rogen's still good.
I'd prefer Drake, but he won't do it.
Others, though, say they're just happy he's Canadian.
I don't really think that's a matter.
He has a voice that I would want to hear on my commute. I don't know, I just feel like it make you smile and kind of laugh.
Yeah.
A Halifax police officer is getting a lot of attention these days after a video surfaced of him busting a move at a busy late-night intersection, Pizza Corner. The CBC's Tom Murphy caught up with Constable Jordan Shepard to check out those moves for himself, call it a dance-off, and call it our moment of the day.
It happened kind of spontaneously. We were at Pizza Corner monitoring the crowd. About a minute later, the song starts.
You couldn't help yourself, could you?
No, I couldn't. I just wanted to dance, but I had no idea it would turn into something like this. Well, I think that it showed police in a different light. I'm glad that it went viral in the sense that it's showing the human side. We all have a job to do, and I just hope that it breaks down some barriers, so to speak.
All right, back to the whip, nay, nay, the dance there.
Okay. So the first one is a whip, and then we nay, nay.
Nay, nay, okay.
And then we do it again, same hand, whip, whip, second hand, nay, nay. And then just put it together. There you go. You're pretty good. I've always been known to sing and dance and have a good time, and just so happens that I did it in uniform. Ellen, call me.
Well, Ian, I will say this, different people are impressed by different things. Some people are really impressed by great public speakers. I'm impressed by a guy who can just get up on a whim in the middle of a big crowd and just start dancing. That's something.
It is a whole genre, right? If you go around YouTube, you can find various police officers doing various dance moves across North America, and it's all partially about playing against type, but also just trying to kind of reach out. So if the 4 national hosts were to do it, least likely to do any dancing, you and me, most likely our friend Rosemary. In fact, we should encourage her to do it when she's back from vacation next week.
I'm on board.
That is the National for Tuesday, July 31st. Good night.
Good night.